Hi, I'm Julia Strand, and I run the Carleton Perception Lab. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to tell you about the lab, the kinds of things that we study, and our approach to conducting science. The lab consists of me, a recent alum who serves as a lab manager, and 8 to 10 awesome Carleton undergrads. Along with, of course, our lab mascot, Percy the Perception Lab Penguin. The lab is located in the newly renovated Olin Hall. Come on in, I'll show you around. The lab contains individual testing rooms for running participants and collecting data, and also a conference room where we can have lab meetings and work together. Because our research is on how people perceive spoken language, we run a lot of our studies in these sound attenuating booths, which help reduce distraction from ambient noise. In the lab, we're trying to unravel the mysteries of how people understand spoken language. How is it that we are doing this thing we're doing right now, you and me? As I speak, sound waves from my voice are coming out of your headphones or your computer speakers and hitting your ears. Then those sound waves are translated into electrochemical changes that can be interpreted by your brain. And then somehow, those electrochemical changes cause you to have ideas and think thoughts. This is truly a remarkable ability. Somehow I can use this hole in the bottom half of my face, and by flapping it around in a specific way, I can shape events in your mind. Now, it may not on the surface seem like understanding spoken language is impressive. It seems like you just hear words and understand what they are, right? But it's actually an incredibly complex process. Let me show you why. When I say the words, we don't pause between words when we speak. What you hear is a neat series of individual words, separate and distinct, lined up like little beads on a string. In fact, the acoustic input, the sounds themselves that you're actually getting, is very messy. Here's a waveform representing the energy in that sentence. The actual points where silences occur are as likely to come within words as they are to come between words. Although it sounds like you're hearing my words individually, like they have spaces between them, splitting words into discrete units is one of our perceptual challenges. The spaces aren't actually there in the signal. So one challenge we face is simply figuring out where one word ends and the next begins. Further complicating this is the fact that often we have to perceive speech in the presence of other talkers or ambient noise like traffic or computer fans. You might be looking at this visual and thinking, wait, that's not actually that hard. I can still read those words. But that's only because I have explicitly distinguished the different sources, the speech we're interested in listening to, and the background noise and people talking in the other room. The real input that hits your ears looks more like this. So another challenge is just figuring out which sounds you're hearing actually have to do with the speech that you're interested in. Further complicating this is the fact that speech unfolds incredibly quickly, at rates of up to 200 words a minute. And it's not only going fast, but it disappears as it unfolds. That is, another challenge is that after the words are spoken, they're gone. This is very different from reading, where you can glance back to an earlier paragraph if you realized you've misunderstood something. We don't have that luxury with spoken language. But wait, there's more things that make understanding speech really, really hard.
Another
challenge.
2.
Recognizing
spoken
words
Is
that
Every
voice
sounds
different.
So once we have successfully parsed a fast, messy, disappearing speech signal into units, we still have the challenge of figuring out what those units mean, dealing with ambiguity at the word level as well. For example, if I say Carleton Knights, you have to figure out whether I mean knights like knights or knights like knights. So at this point, we have a fast, messy, disappearing, and ambiguous signal. And yet, here you are, understanding speech in what feels like an instant and effortless way. So the question that keeps me up nights, The thing that drives me, the thing that drives the research in the lab is simply, how are we pulling this off? How can we be so good at a task that should be so difficult? So this is the focus of our work. Our research attempts to identify the mechanisms and processes that allow listeners to overcome the challenges of perceiving spoken language. To lead you through some of the key topics in our work, I've asked for help from a few current and former students.
One way that we're able to make up for the limitations of a messy acoustic input is by combining what we hear with what we see. When we see someone talk, we get rich information about how their mouth is moving, how they gesture, where they look, or who they are. One particularly important type of information we're clearly getting from a talking face is information about the speech sounds the person is saying. Interestingly, visual information and auditory information tend to be complementary. That is, phonemes that are very confusable in the auditory domain tend to look pretty different on the face. Map and nap are difficult to distinguish in noise, but easy to distinguish with a talking face. Work in the perception lab has studied how seeing the talker relative to hearing them alone facilitates the recognition of speech and affects the cognitive resources necessary to process the speech, why some people seem to be more affected by the presence of a talking face than others, and what kind of information is being conveyed by the visual signal.
In addition to the contributions of visual information, we can also make up for limitations of the acoustic input by using context to predict what people are going to say. See what I did there? Listeners may use context in the form of semantics or meaning, like if I said, I have a new pet. She barks and she likes going for walks. Oh, by the way, she's a dog. We can also use grammatical context to anticipate upcoming words. For example, hearing she thought about the guides listeners to expect that the next word is likely to be a noun. Or there are some should predispose listeners to predict that the next word will be plural. One of the methodologies we use to measure how listeners use context is eye tracking. In eye tracking studies, we're able to measure where participants are looking on a computer screen. The eye tracker sends out infrared light that contacts the participant's eyes and is reflected off the retina. And the way the light is reflected gives us information about where on the computer screen the participant is looking. The particular items on the screen that participants are fixating on as they hear that spoken sentence, that gives us information about the word choices the participants are considering as they listen to the speech. In the lab, we found that listeners can use context to anticipate what's going to be said next, and they rapidly integrate contextual cues with the unfolding words to help disambiguate similar sounding items.
The lab has also studied listening effort, the cognitive resources necessary to understand speech. Imagine this. You're in a quiet room having a conversation with someone who is speaking clearly with no background noise. You can typically understand everything that they're saying, and with relatively little effort. If, instead, you move that conversation into a noisy restaurant with lots of background noise and dim lighting so you can't see the speaker's face, the task becomes more difficult. Now, importantly, you might still be able to understand everything that the speaker is saying, but it feels harder. You know what I mean? That difficulty is listening effort. We often describe listening effort as that feeling you get in a noisy situation of squinting your ears and your brain to try to understand your conversational partner. In the perception lab, we've studied how listening effort is affected by the level of background noise and how effort differs when you can see the talker relative to hearing them alone. We've also compared multiple methods for measuring effort to better understand how it can be quantified.
Students in the lab are responsible for every part of the research process. They conduct literature reviews, design studies, write code, run participants, analyze data, and write papers. My goal is to give the students hands-on experience with the entire research process. In the last 10 years, over 50 students have worked in the lab. We've collectively written 18 papers and presented at multiple regional and national conferences. We've also managed to have a lot of fun along the way. The lab has been generously supported by Carleton and is currently also funded by a grant from the National Institutes of Health via the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders. In addition to teaching students about the facts of science, I'm also committed to teaching them about the process of science.
The process we use to conduct research in the perception lab attempts to increase transparency, and follow principles of what is referred to as open science. For example, after we publish a paper, we share all the stimuli we used our studies, our raw data, and analysis code in a public repository. This allows other researchers to attempt to replicate our work and use our data to answer new questions. We also pre-register our studies, meaning we specify our hypotheses and methods in an uneditable database before we collect the data, so others can see that we conducted the analysis as we planned to and make any deviations from our plans apparent. In addition, we share what are called preprints of our work. These are publicly accessible versions of our papers that anyone can access, even if they don't have a subscription to an academic journal. The hope is that using these methods will make our research more replicable and robust, and make the works and products of the work maximally accessible. Thank you.
To help others apply open science to their work, we've written papers about the pedagogical benefits of doing open science with undergrads. And I'm currently designing a workshop to help teach other faculty at small liberal arts colleges about incorporating open science into their teaching and research. If you want to learn more about open science, you can take my publicly accessible open science class, which is one of the seminars that psych majors take to prepare for their comps. But the best way to hear about the lab is from some alums themselves.
Working in the Perception Lab, I had the opportunity to do some incredibly fascinating speech research. And not only that, but the community of scientists that Julia has created is truly, truly wonderful. I am currently pursuing my PhD in psychology at UC San Diego, and I use the research skills I learned in the Perception Lab every day.
Really, Perception Lab taught me too much to capture in a short video, but what comes to mind is that it helped me learn how to collaboratively write a research paper, which really comes in handy in my current job where I often have to write joint proposals that make sense and are persuasive to a broad audience.
I learned a lot from my time in the Perception Lab, and just as one really recent example, I just started running an interview study, and I really feel like my time spent running studies and working with participants in the lab really helped prepare me for this, even though I'm now in a completely different field.
Through my exploration of auditory research in the Perception Lab, I found that I have a passion for the clinical side of research, which led me to pursue a career in medicine. The skills that I gained in the Perception Lab, such as how to work well on a research team and how to effectively communicate scientific knowledge, have really set me up well to succeed in both medical school and my future career as a physician.
I'm currently a PhD student in psychology, and I definitely would not be where I am today if I hadn't been part of the Perception Lab. I think I really, through being in the lab, figured out that I love pursuing new research questions, things that people don't know the answer to yet, and doing that in particular with a group, a team of people who are just excited about the same topic as I am.
From day one at the Perception Lab, Professor Strand welcomed me and my classmates to the research table as her peers. We of course had rewarding experience running the lab's experiments, but we also had opportunities to help design the next experiment and join in the broad sort of conceptual and structural thinking that went along with it. For me, that early exposure to abstract thinking unlocked a voracious appetite for theory, a yearning which drives my own research career to this day, and for which I'm ever grateful.
If you want to learn more about the lab and the work we do, you can visit our website. Thanks very much for your interest in the lab and for your attention. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today.